Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Kimberly Giarratano.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I know I was saying this to you before we got started, but I have been reading your book, Death of a Dancing Queen, and I am obsessed. I'm so excited to chat with you today about it.
I am always excited to hear somebody tell me they're obsessed with my writing.
It is fantastic. Can you actually tell me a little bit about it?
Okay, so my elevator pitch is that it's Veronica Mars meets the GWB. It's set in North Jersey, in Bergen County, New Jersey, and features a 24-year-old woman who takes over her grandfather's private investigation business in order to care for her mother, who has early onset Alzheimer's disease. She's hoping the flexible hours will allow her to work and pay the bills. And I wrote this before COVID, so it didn't even occur to me that she could have a job working from home, but that wouldn't be very fun. So I didn't make that happen anyway. And her first case, of course, she's hoping for an easy, catch somebody cheating on their spouse kind of case. But she wounds up, her first case is a college student who comes in looking for his missing girlfriend. And she thinks the girl's just ghosting him because he has a drug problem. But of course, that's not what happens at all. And she gets embroiled in a gang war between neo-Nazi skinheads and a Jewish mob. And that Jewish mob happens to be connected to her ex-boyfriend, and there's a 30-year-old cold case also wrapped in. So it's a lot of fun. It is fun. It's my I think it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, it is. It's a really fun read, and I found myself, I kept getting swept up in oh my God, and who did it? Wait, and there's this new element, and constantly trying to guess what was going on and seeing where it was going. How did you write something like? I know you'd said before that were writing this as something you'd want to read. Can you tell me a little bit about that process?
I love Veronica Mars. And when the show went off the air, I read the books. I gave into the Kickstarter movie. I watched the Hulu season. I love the show. And I'm like, why are there not more young, savvy, female private eyes? Because I really do like private eye fiction. And I love reading Raymond Chandler. I like Philip Marlowe. My only gripe with it is it was written in a really sexist time and the women always come off as hysterical. But there's something about a resourceful heroine who's underestimated because of her age and gender. So I really wanted to work with that. One of the things I love about private eye fiction is it's a pretty, it's following the clues. It's one of my favorite subgenres to read. So I was lonely for Veronica Mars, and I was reading Janet Ivanovich, Stephanie Plum, and Sarah Paretsky, and Sue Grafton. And then I was looking for some more modern, because a lot of the stories, they're still continuing, but Sue Grafton's not alive anymore. So Sarah Paretsky's still publishing. The woman's amazing. But I was looking for some more modern takes. So I was reading then Rachel Housel Hall, who wrote 4 books about a police detective in Los Angeles. And Kristen LeBianco, who wrote a private investigation series about a woman in Columbus, Ohio. So I was having some fun, but I wanted more. I was so greedy. I was I could write fan fiction or I could write my own PI. And that's really how it came about. I just had a vision for her. And I definitely was she has to be from Jersey because that's where I'm from. And, she's going to be Jewish because that's what I am. And I wanted her young because I really did envision this as being a long series that I originally thought I would self-publish. So I thought I can make as many books as I want. Who's going to stop me? And I had this idea of just aging her and life happening to her over time. And I wanted her youngish for that reason. So I could really continue the saga as long as I wanted to.
I love that so much. And with stories like that, I feel like, especially in this kind of book, you can really feel the passion through it.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely could, because it's something that you're writing based off something that you already like. You read certain books and it's you can tell that the person was just writing it to write a book.
Yeah,
and this didn't feel that way. Yeah.
I had fun. I mean, that's not to say it wasn't hard. And that's not to say writing the next book isn't hard, because of course now I feel like there's a lot of expectations. And I did read some reviews and I was maybe I should fix some things. But
never read the reviews.
I know better. And I'm a masochist. I think I meant to look for the good ones and I saw the bad ones by accident. But
I understand that.
Yeah. I know better. I should slap my hand. But there is a little bit more pressure and it's definitely work. But when I'm having fun in a scene, I'm like, oh, this should read well because I'm enjoying myself. And then, there's
Definitely.
some scenes where I'm like, not right, something's not right. I got to fix it, and I got to go over, and I got to go over it a lot. But
Mhm.
I'm
Are
glad
you
it's
currently?
palpable.
Oh yeah, it is. Are you currently writing the follow up to this?
I am. I'm very excited about it because it wouldn't be me if I didn't have like a really windy plot. I guess I like to keep readers guessing.
Mhm.
I think it's because I write in crime fiction. When I read crime fiction, I can often guess who I can guess the who done it really fast.
Yeah.
And for me, then it becomes the why done it, which is totally fine. But there's something to be said about kind of keeping readers guessing. And so I find myself twisting over backwards in order to keep doing that. But I am writing book number 2, and it has to do with like an art hoarder and ties back to Nazi Germany and art thievery. That's sort of the theme of what I'm working on in book 2. And I have an idea for book 3 that I'm percolating on right now. So, but I am working on
Oh,
it. It's fun.
that sounds so cool. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question about if you were thinking about continuing this, if that was something from the start, and like how that, at what point that came into play.
So again, I thought this would be an indie series. My young adult novels that I have are, for the most part, self-published. They didn't
Mhm.
start out that way, but I have my rights and yada yada yada. They're self-published. So I thought I was just going to create. I'm like, this is a great idea for an indie series. I just knew that again, I could write as many books as I wanted, and that it would really appeal to adult readers. I felt that strongly, and life happens, and I got an agent. I love my agent, love this woman, and we wound up selling the book to Angry Robot's new crime fiction imprint, Tora Books. Also
Mhm.
fabulous people. Love my editor to pit. Eleanor, I love her to death. But we also agreed, like we saw this as a series. I set it up to be a series because I thought originally I would be in control of like its longevity. So, um, you know, we definitely plan on more books. I just need readers to make sure they buy the ones that are that's currently out. If you want to
Yes,
see
go
books in a
buy it.
series, go buy them. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Indie authors can do whatever the hell they want, but unfortunately, traditionally published cannot. So,
Mhm.
the best way to support your authors is to buy their books and recommend them to everybody so that there is a reason to keep publishing them.
Yes,
But
everyone
yeah,
listening to this, go please buy this book and support any author that you're
yes,
interested in.
amen. Preach. Yes,
Mhm.
word. But yeah, I'm excited. I have great plans for Billy. And I just, I'm like, oh, I'm God in this scenario. I can just do whatever I want.
Yes, yeah, that is a fun part about writing.
Yeah,
Um, so at what point did the Alzheimer's plot come in? And can you talk a little bit about that part of the story? Because it adds a lot of heart to it.
it does. So my mom has dementia. Whether or not she has Alzheimer's disease, we'll never know at this point because she's very stubborn about getting into an MRI machine. But she does have a form of dementia. So, and she did start developing symptoms before 60. So that's where the early onset part came. And like Billy's fears about her future are pretty much my fears about my future because I have my mom's direct genetic link.
Mhm.
But so a lot of that is, it's incredibly personal in that regard. So a lot of people find that particular part of the story really heart wrenching, and it is, which is why I sort of make up for it in terms of fun with the crime
Mhm.
and the criminal aspects. Um, happen to be a lot lighter, believe it or not. When I believe it or not, the murder is the least depressing part of the book. The book's actually not
Yeah,
depressing at all. It's quite funny. I would say it's very joyful in many ways, but there
it
are
definitely
parts,
is.
yeah, that are incredibly realistic. And Billy's mom having early onset Alzheimer's is definitely one of those. It also really it keeps her grounded in New Jersey. Like she does, prior to her mom's diagnosis, she had all of these dreams of traveling, seeing the world. And she really feels like she cannot do that. She needs to be home because she does have a brother, but the two of them trade off on their responsibilities with their mom. They really work in tandem. And even that has its conflicts.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely made the book feel very grounded, and it made it feel real, because you found that balance of humor in it with also these darker aspects. Because I do love dark books, but it can be a lot when it's like, oh, there's murder and then there's illness and all of this, and it's just kind of weighing so heavily. But this has a lot of, like you said, a lot of joy in it.
Yeah, I need that balance myself. Otherwise, I'm like, I can't write this. It's so depressing. So I definitely I have fun where I insert comedic relief. And it's not I'll never insert comedic relief for comedic relief's sake. Usually it's a character who's just naturally funny who brings it to the table anyway.
Mhm.
And my people are funny. it's a
Yeah.
We're very funny people. I just feel like I've never written a book that doesn't have some of my humor in it. And I can never tell if my jokes land. So I always ask, did that joke
Well,
work?
they landed with me. And you know what? That's how life is too, because it's people are funny. Like there's always going to be comedic situations that happen, even in like more dramatic parts of real life.
Oh, absolutely. And I definitely use humor as a self-defense mechanism for sure.
Oh,
I am one
same.
of those people.
Yeah,
Yeah. So naturally I'll just put it in the book. Yeah, it's funny.
of
A lot of
course.
me goes in there. A lot of things like if there's ever mention of music in my books, that's me. Like that's the songs I like, the music I
Oh,
like.
that's so cool. Yeah. Do you use music in any way while you're writing? Like, do you like to listen to it or?
I will listen to classical music on YouTube in order to focus. I cannot listen to music I can sing to write because I will sing and not write.
Oh, that's really interesting. I know
But
it's so different for everyone.
yeah, I will make a plate like my first novel I ever wrote was is a young adult novel. It's a mystery with ghosts and it's set in 1996. So music, there's every chapter has a song like subtitle. So it
Oh,
basically makes
cool.
a playlist to the book for like
Mhm.
each song goes with the chapter. So I definitely like to use music as a tie-in, but I cannot listen to my favorite music while I write or I'm not writing. I'm just listening to music.
Yeah, I get that. When I was younger, I used to be crazy and listen to podcasts at the same time as writing. And that broke me, so I have to have like complete silence now.
I love the idea of complete silence, but I can't get it in my house. Even my dog, I had to put
Yeah.
my dog in the basement so he wouldn't bark during the podcast. Because if he sees people walking by, he'll bark. So I was like, you gotta go in the basement. But classical music or any type of like, it just kind of goes in the background. And I think scientifically, it's supposed to help your brain fire.
Oh yeah,
It's supposed to
definitely.
induce creativity. So I'm like, let's give it a whirl. It does work. I mean, it works and then I can focus. So
That's really cool. Yeah. Actually, so you brought up this YA series. Can you tell me a little bit about that and talk about like writing adult and YA?
So I was a young adult librarian. I was a teacher first. I have two master's degrees. I always say I'm
Oh
overeducated
wow.
and underemployed. I know it sounds so impressive, but
That's incredible. Yeah.
I don't get to use them really. Well, I do teach part
What are
time
your
in the
degrees
morning.
in?
So I have a degree in education with concentration of teaching ESL, so English as a second
Oh,
language,
nice.
and I
Yeah.
have a master's in library science. So I could be an academic librarian, except I don't have the experience. So it's really hard to get hired for that. But that's neither here nor there. But I was a teacher first, and then I went back to school for my master's in library science, and I was a librarian, and I worked as a young adult librarian at a public library in New Jersey. So I was surrounded by young adult books. I read nonstop young adult books. And prior to that job, I did not read YA because I was an adult and YA didn't really exist when I was a teenager. Like I could read R.L. Stine or Christopher Pike, or I could read adult like John. I was reading like Michael Crichton and John Grisham. Like that was what I was reading as a teenager because there was no John Green because John Green's roughly my age, so he was a teenager. And but as a YA librarian, I was surrounded by books and I'm reading all this great YA. And it was really the first time in my life where I thought, I could do this. I had always been a writer, but I was writing, I was in journalism. I
Mhm.
entered as a journalist, journalism major. I was editor for my college paper. I was a history major, so I wound up writing a ton of history papers. So I was always a really good writer. And I always was very creative, but I thought you needed like an MFA to be a writer, that you needed some type of training to be a write, like to write fiction. And you do. Let me back that up. You do need to read books on craft. You have to understand craft, but you don't have to
Oh,
go
of
to
course.
college, which is
Yeah.
what I guess in my head, I was like, you have to go to college to be a writer. And I was just reading so much YA and I'm like, I could do this. Easily said and done. I mean, there was a lot of false starts. There was a lot of procrastination. There was a lot of years in between. But eventually I sat down and I finished a draft. And then I took a self-paced online class called How to Revise Your Novel by Holly Lyle.
Mm.
And it took 6 months to revise my novel. And that taught me a lot. And then I started querying it, and it got picked up by a small publisher who's still publishing today,
Oh.
Red Debt Publishing. They just don't publish YA anymore. Um,
Mhm.
YA is still a big five market because
Oh, definitely.
teenagers want physical books that they can go get in the bookstore, the library, or their friend's house, or their parents buy them. They're not e-readers. They want to, and I get it. So having published with a small press, and then I did self-publish my second book. So that was Dead and Breakfast. I'm sorry. That was Grunge Gods and Graveyards. That novel is set in 1996 when I was a teenager. And it combines a ghost story with a murder mystery. It's about alternative music. It's my love letter
I
to
have to
alternative
listen.
music.
I mean, I've got to read this. This sounds amazing.
You know what? It is a really good book. And I know I wrote it, but when
Yeah,
I,
you
like my
shouldn't be able to
friends,
say that
my
about your
friends will be
books.
like, it's still my favorite book that you wrote, which surprises me because you get better as you become a writer. And like
Mhm.
my later works, I feel like are so much stronger, but everyone loves Grunge Gods and Graveyards. And then I self-published a novella to go with it about a side character who's really intriguing. And that was a lot of fun. So that has flashbacks to the 1950s. So if you like history and your mystery, I'm your girl. And then I have two young adult novels that are set in Key West, Florida. So that's Dead and Breakfast and Ghost and Found. And that was a ton of fun because I took a trip to Key West in 2011. And the
Mhm.
whole time I'm there, I'm like, this would be the best setting for a book. How could I not
Oh,
write a
that's
book here?
awesome.
So I wrote a story about a teenage girl who can see ghosts. She winds up moving from New Jersey to Key West to work in her great aunt's haunted bed and breakfast, hence the name Dead and Breakfast. And her mom like does not believe in any of that. She's trying to turn it into a legitimate hotel. But obviously the ghosts are working against that idea. So that was a lot of fun. And there are flashbacks into the 60s for the first one, and then in the 1920s for the second book. I had a lot of fun dealing with like Key West Prohibition era.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and the Jewish community in Key West. I got to research stuff for that too.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
and thank you. And then I wrote another young adult novel called School Lies, which is set in 1985. And that doesn't have any paranormal elements, but it is a murder mystery at its core. And I really love that book. Um, I remember I think I rewrote it at 75,000 words, which I've never done before. I rewrote the whole damn thing. So it was a lot of work, but I'm really proud of it. And yeah, those are my young adult novels. And Death of a Dancing Queen is my first adult novel. And that was a blast too.
What was it like making that switch over into writing adult novels with Death of a Dancing Queen?
So my audience is obviously different. I am not writing with teenagers in mind. I am writing with adults in mind. And also my protagonist is an adult. She to me is technically a young adult. 24 to me is a young adult.
Yeah,
It's funny how we call it YA. I'm like, why don't we just call it teen fiction? But YA
I
is
read it
also
mostly. Oh, what were you gonna say? Sorry.
so when I was a librarian, we called it YA. And then I would go into a bookstore and I'd like, where's your YA section? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, YA, young adult, teen fiction. They're like, oh, our teen fiction is over there. So I found like, I don't think it's the same anymore, but librarians calling it YA, but the booksellers calling it teen fiction. I
Mhm.
found that now I think it's a standard term, but um, what was I saying? Oh yeah. It was just my audience was different. And it wasn't my writing style doesn't change very much when I move from young adult to adult. I still have my same writing voice, which I think is pretty distinct. Like I think when you read
Yeah,
a Kim book, you're like, this is a Kim book. I can
that's really
um,
important to have too.
I think so. I like when I can read a passage and guess who might have like which author this sounds like. I think it's really special.
Mhm.
So I'd like to think I've attained that in some regard. But the perspective would be different. I mean, let's just take, for example, a 16-year-old. I don't think a 16-year-old, if a 16-year-old has a parent with early onset Alzheimer's disease, which can certainly happen depending on when someone becomes a parent, when somebody gets diagnosed. I don't know if that looking down the road at my future is going to hit a 16-year-old the way it might hit a 26-year-old.
Yeah.
So I knew when I had this idea for a private eye, I didn't want to turn it into like exactly like Veronica Mars, the teen years. I really wanted to work with a PI in the adult sphere because I wanted her to have some limitations. But with one of the like teenagers, just by extension of their age, are underestimated. And you could see my dog now.
Oh,
and
it's so cute.
he is a cutie. Um, and I wanted to give her a little bit more power. And just by being an adult with adult responsibilities, and I wanted her to have to interact with the police department, and I wanted her to have romances that, I didn't want to have to be careful with some things, that I would have to be more mindful with my young adult novels. I just didn't want to, I wanted to kind of just have, I just was like in the mood to just work with an adult character.
Yeah, YA does present a lot of different challenges than adult novels, and like there's a lot of like a whole other set of rules and restrictions around what you can say and how it works.
It's interesting because when I talk to people, they're always people who don't read YA. I had an interview not that long ago, and it was really like enlightening to me because they're like, "Oh, well, you can't talk about sex in young adult." I'm like, "Excuse me, yes, you can."
Whoa.
There's
I have read
really
many young adults that is not true.
that's right, and there's really no topic, in my opinion, that's off limits. And I'm not going to sit there and talk about, I don't know, like the geriatric community in a young adult novel, unless my protagonist is somehow working, in a nursing home. But it's not that the topics are off limits, but you do have to take care with them in a way you don't necessarily have to do with adult fiction.
Yes.
And I'm always really surprised at how often adult fiction, like reviews, will come out hard for language. Like adults will get mad when there's cursing, I have found in adult books.
Oh,
But
weird.
it's so weird. I cannot tell you how many authors I know who are like, I keep getting yelled at about language in my reviews. But there isn't, for the most part, in young adult literature, like if you're writing for an older teen audience, cursing is part of the norm. What teenager doesn't
Yeah.
curse at this point? Also, I find young adult has always been so much more progressive than adult fiction. Young adult, will definitely tackle gender identity more openly. And it takes a while to sort of trickle into adult fiction after time. But in terms of topics being off limit, I've yet to find one. But how you approach it, how you handle it, you do have to be responsible since teens are your readers. That's,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember because I still read YA. I love it, but when I was reading it the very most, I was like between 12 and 13, and I figured out that's where all of the fantasy that I like to read was. And at that point I was already reading adult books, but YA had the best like paranormal stuff and like mystical stuff, and I devoured those. I read through them so fast because they were so good, and they definitely had that more progressive bent that
Mhm.
you were talking about, which was really important to me and still is.
Yeah, me too. Because it also reflects our world.
Mhm.
And I mean, my favorite authors are still young adult authors.
Oh yeah.
Holly Black. I'm obsessed with Holly Black. We're both from New Jersey. We both went to the same colleges. I love her to death. I met her in person. She's so lovely. She could write a menu and I will buy it. I mean, like, I just love her work. And she does often have mystery, like, there is usually a mystery at her core that you have to kind of solve along. But she is squarely a fantasy writer for sure. We don't really,
Mhm.
and we write in different audience levels and we write in different genres, but she is by far my favorite author forever.
Do, do you have any others like that that like have really influenced your writing in your
So Holly Black for
process?
100% has, because one of the things about Holly Black's writing is she is an efficient writer. And
Mhm.
what I mean, like, she has a knack for using description and using the precise word so that her language if I get lost in a sentence, it's because I get lost in how well constructed it. That's
Oh,
how I
that's
feel it.
fabulous.
Right. Like, and I will take that to my writing. I'm like,
Mm.
look how she describes this tree in one sentence. Like, and then we just move on. Or the way she has dialogue done so that you can visualize it, but it's not bogged down. She should teach a class. Um, but I love her. And Maggie Stiefwater is another author that I love because I love the Scorpio races. I love the Raven Cycle quartet. Like love those books.
Oh, yeah.
And she has such a great use. So like the way she uses metaphor, I think is unlike any other author. Like I know when I'm reading a Maggie Stiefwater book because it's just her voice is so iconic, I think.
Her books have been on my to read list for a while now.
Oh,
I've been
please
waiting.
get to them.
Yes, I will soon.
I love the Scorpio races. And if you were in my house, you'd be like, Kim, you don't have as many books as I thought you might have for being a writer, a reader, a librarian, because I don't have the room. And I use my Kindle a lot, but I buy those books. I keep them on my shelf because I like to read them when I'm doing my own writing to see if I can stretch, my writing muscle more than I have already. So I will definitely use those, but she's great. I've also just got into Mick Herron because I watched Slow Horses on Apple TV.
Mm.
Do you know Slow Horses?
I have heard of it, but I have not yet seen or read it.
So I watched this first 2 seasons on Apple, and I didn't know it was a book. Shame on me. And
that happens to me so much.
I'm like,
I think it's a common thing.
Slipped my notice. So I picked up the 3rd book in the series because the first 2 seasons follow the first 2 books, and I wanted to read. I wanted to find out I didn't want to know what happens. So I read the 3rd book in the series. I was fine. I caught it. It was not hard to catch up if I watched the TV show. His writing is so great. Talk about using dark humor and brilliant. I was laughing. It was so well done. So I am now a new fan of Mick Herron. But there are also mystery authors that I love. I like Chuck Hogan. I love Megan Abbott. I love Megan Abbott's early stuff where she has a story set in the 1950s, the 1920s. That the way it's written is like an indulgent dessert. It's so good. It's so sleazy. I love it.
Ooh. All right. Well, now I've got a whole new list of author recommendations I'll have to go check out. Thank you for that.
Please. That's what librarians are for. We're to tell you what to read. I like when people ask, what should I read? I'm like, oh, let me give you a list.
Oh my God. It's my favorite question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been so great chatting with you today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate all the compliments, and I love talking books. I could talk books all day. Such a fun combo.
Me too. It is, yeah. And thank you. You're a brilliant writer, and this was an excellent conversation. I just have one last question. What do you have coming up?
Billy #2, that's what I'm working on. And I'm also working on a historical mystery set in 1951 Manhattan.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Yes, it is. It's actually, I'm going to toot my own horn. It's like, it's still in its rough phases, but it's some of my best writing. I'm like, damn, I wrote that. Sometimes when you reread yourself, you're like, I am very good at this.
It's the best moment. Yeah. Absolutely.
So many writers are like, oh, this is garbage and utter garbage. And then I'll go back and I'll be like, no, it's not. It's fine. But that I'm very excited about too, but that is slow going, as everything I do is slow because I overplot and overthink, but I'm very excited about that as well. So that'll take me the rest of the year to work on, but I mean, it's not a contracted book, so we'll see what happens with it when it's done, but yep, that's my projects right now. So, and I'll be at some conferences and stuff. So if your listeners go to Thriller Fest or BoucherCon, I will be there. I'm excited about that too.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Good luck with all of the writing and
publishing
that. Those all sound really interesting. And yeah, everyone go please buy Death of a Dancing Queen so we can get a sequel.
Yeah, well, you're going to get it. I'm going to give it to you no matter what. But I would love to be able to keep this going for the long term because I have fun plans for my character and her family. So
exciting. All right. Well, for Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Kimberly Giarratano.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.